السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the fiqh of worship, and we were talking about the Athan, and the Athan being al-i'lam bidukhul al-waqt. The Athan is to inform and to announce to the people the beginning of the time of the Salah. And as mentioned, that it is the time for the Adhan is when the time of the Salah starts. And therefore, if a person makes Adhan before the time of the Salah starts, it is not is not valid. And the Mu'adhin has to repeat the Adhan again after the time of the Salah starts. And we talked about the words of the Adhan. And this is one of the clear signs of Islam, and as they call it, Sha'arul Islam. You are in any place, to know that the place is place of Muslims is when the Adhan is being declared and announced, and it's done to be said loud. And the virtue of it is very clear, and there are many ahadith about it. But we're talking about the matters of fiqh and how to perform the Adhan. And many times we see people when they're making Adhan, they're not following really the proper etiquettes or matters according to the matters of ilm and knowledge and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's important to learn it. And before we go on further, inshallah, I'm not sure if you would be able to hear this clearly, but I would like for you, I would make you hear the adhan of Sheikh al-Albani rahimahullah. Sheikh al-Albani rahimahullah, one time he was teaching the people, and they asked him to teach them how to make adhan in the proper way. So he made adhan. So let's listen to it, inshallah. I'll have you listen to it first, and then we'll talk about it, inshallah. So here's the adhan of Sheikh al-Albani rahimahullah. Please pay attention, inshallah.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
So hopefully the voice was clear. The tape is an old one, so it's... So this is the adhan of Sheikh al-Albani rahimahullah, teaching the people how to make adhan. And as you heard, the words of the adhan are very clear, and those statements that some of the deviants or some of the people they added to the adhan, which is not part of it, this is something, of course, to be avoided. And alhamdulillah, in many places now they don't have these words like hayya al-amal, like the Shia, they would add hayya al-amal, or making salah on the Prophet ﷺ loud in the microphones, or as if it's part of the adhan afterwards, which is a dhikr to be said after the adhan, but not part or one of the words of the adhan. That's why when we heard the words, or when we know the words of the adhan of Bilal radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ ordered him to make adhan with specific words, it's 15 sentences, which is Allahu Akbar twice, and then twice, and then Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. So you have 4 Allahu Akbars, and then you have 2 Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and then 2 Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and then 2 Hayya ala salah, and 2 Hayya al falah, and then Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. And for Salatul Fajr, as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. And as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm is to be said in the second adhan of al-fajr. If people are making two adhan of fajr, one before the time and one at the time of fajr, then as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm is to be said twice in the second adhan. Or if one adhan only is called for fajr, then to say in it as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. That is before or saying Allahu Akbar at the end, or after saying Hayya ala al-falah. What we heard from the adhan of the Sheikh, we didn't see him, but one of the things to be done as Bilal radiallahu anhu did, and the Prophet sallallahu whenever the Sahabi does something at the time of the Prophet sallallahu, and the Prophet sallallahu doesn't say anything about it, that means it's from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu, especially that Bilal is the mu'adhin of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. That means the Prophet sallallahu taught him how to make the adhan, and the way that he even look of when he's making adhan is also something that is taught by the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So he would put his two fingers, the forefinger, the index finger, I'm sorry, into his ears, the finger that you make that you move in the tashahhud, right? The finger that you move the tashahhud, he would put it in his ears, one the right and the right and the left and the left, and whether it's to make the sound louder and reaches further distances, regardless, this is something, even if you have microphone in front of you, even if you're making adhan in the masjid, it's something to revive and to keep this sunnah. It has a great wisdom behind it, as Dora mentioned, and that's something that for people that could see that in some remote areas or some places where they still would have the mu'adhin outside, which is another benefit that we need to learn. But the point here is for the mu'adhin to look like he's making adhan. So to make adhan is to put the two fingers in the ears while making the adhan. And they used to see, someone that is mute, not able, deaf, does not hear. He can also know that the adhan is being called by the outside appearance of the mu'adhin. That's why there is the minara in the masajid, or the minara is not something that was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's something that has been established in the masajid of the Muslimin, and the Muslimin, they took it as a norm. But if there is none, they would go on top of the masjid and they would stand for people to see them. So that's why it's a sunnah for the adhan to be outside, if it's feasible, of course. Why? So that people would see the mu'adhin, because not everybody can hear the sound of the mu'adhin outside, and who are meant by the adhan are those who are outside, not necessarily those who are inside the masjid. And again, you might find that there's specific situations where people are not allowed to have the adhan outside and things like this. We're talking about the norm. The norm is that the adhan in the Muslim land, that people hear the adhan. And therefore, those who are meant by the adhan are those who are outside, in their homes, in their shops, in their businesses. And the iqamah, those who are meant by the iqamah, those who are inside of the masjid. So since those who are meant by the adhan are those who are outside, so the sound is to be loud, and for people to see the mu'adhin. So they used to know that people living from a far distance from the masjid, they would see the mu'adhin on top of the masjid with his fingers in his ears. That means the adhan is being called when they see that. So it's meant for it to be in that state, or being physically having that way, so that it continues to be this way, so that generations, they are raised to see the mu'adhin doing it this way. So whoever is making adhan, don't say, well, I'm in front of the mic, just let me say the adhan and that's it. No, put your fingers in your ears and make the adhan this way. And then when the person says Hayya ala salah twice, is to move his head to the right, is to move the head, not the entire body, not the waist up to the right, but only the head. To turn the head to the right when you're saying Hayya ala salah, and to turn the head to the left when saying Hayya al falah. And of course, it's very obvious for more people to hear it. And even if you're inside the masjid, even if you're saying it in the microphone, do it this way. It's not a mandatory thing. The adhan is still valid if you don't do it, but do it so that we can keep the way of Bilal radiallahu anhu, that the way that he did the adhan. And even also some of the ulama, when they talked about this, since the adhan, the purpose of it is for people to hear the adhan and to get to know that the time of the salah started. If a person is in a place where people are surrounding the masjid, it's okay to go around the minara or on top, to move around in a circle in which everybody would hear him, and this is with his entire body, not just with his face, but the face to move right and left. Right is in Hayya ala Salah, and left in Hayya ala al-Falah. And as you heard in the adhan, it is not done with a tone and stretching it for a long time and make it like a melody type of thing. This is not from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And people have to apply also the rules of the Arabic language and tajweed and so on. And the way that many of the mu'adhineen, even in the haram, you would find the adhan is said in a very stretchy way and with a melody and so on. It's not from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And particularly if someone does not follow the rules when he says the adhan. And as someone asked Imam Ahmad rahimahullah about this, and he said to him, would you like for someone to call you Ya Muhammad, like this? Your name is Muhammad, right? You want people to call you Muhammad, not Muhammad, like he's referring to those who would stretch the words of the adhan in a way that takes the sound of the word not to be correct. So that's why when people stretch it so much in an inappropriate way. So saying the adhan, as we heard, Allahu Akbar, you can stretch the name Allah like this, but not too much. And Akbar is not to be stretched. Otherwise, you can change the meanings. So you say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Akbar, like this, not Akbar. Akbar can give a different meaning. It's something else, not Akbar. And after saying Allahu Akbar, there's something called at-tarji'. At-tarji' in the adhan is for the mu'adhin, after saying Allahu Akbar 4 times, is to say in a lower voice that people would not hear him if they're from a distance from him, is to say to himself, with his tongue moving, of course, to say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, like this. The next 2 or 4 sentences in the adhan, he would say to himself first, before saying it loud. And that's called at-tarji' in the adhan. So the mu'adhin would say it like this: Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. This is said loud. And then to say silently, or only himself, for his own self, to say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And then he would say loud, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and so on. And saying Ashhadu an la, the lam here, the alif here can be stretched 4 to 5 counts. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. So this can be stretched like this, but not in the middle. And then twice, and then saying Ashhadu anna with a shadda. In the first one, Ashhadu alla, right, there is idgham here. The lam takes over the noon. And I've heard more than one time when some people that make adhan, they say Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah. This is wrong, right? There's no shadda in the first one. So Ashhadu, the first one, Ashhadu alla, the noon does not exist in saying Ashhadu alla. In Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, the noon with the shadda takes 2 counts. So you say Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. So the noon has 2 counts. The meme in Muhammad takes 2 counts also. And then Muhammadan Rasulullah also. This is here idgham. The noon does not exist you don't say Muhammadan, you say Muhammadar, because the ra comes after the tanween. And you don't stay there. You don't say Muhammadar. No, you say it right away, Muhammadar Rasulullah. So you say Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, like this. So this is to be said twice. And then after that, Hayya ala Salah. Hayya with a shadda. So Hayya. And there's no stretching there. Hayya ala salah. You can stretch the salah, and then hayya ala salah again, and then hayya ala al-falah the same way, twice. And then after that, saying Allahu Akbar again, and then at the end, La ilaha illallah, the lam alif, again you can stretch it. And for as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm, you can also to be as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. So this is how to say the adhan, as we heard, and it's from the sunnah to say it on a higher place if it's feasible. It's sunnah to be said outside if it's feasible. That's why we should keep on teaching it, even if it's not done in many places, so that that thing is still part of the ilm to be taught. This is for the mu'adhin. Is it mandatory for the mu'adhin to be in state of wudu? When we talk about matters of fiqh, we have to be careful that the rulings, when it's mentioned, it does not mean that this is what a person should do. When we say that, what if a mu'adhin gives an adhan without being in wudu? The adhan is valid. He does not have to repeat the adhan. But should he do that? Of course not. He should be in wudu, and that's the sunnah. That's what's recommended. But there are some situations where the mu'adhin is late and the time for the salah starts. And there are people waiting for the adhan to be called for them to break their fast. Or they're eating suhoor, and if he's late, that means they might be just eating when it's time for fajr. So the mu'adhin has to make the adhan right on time. So if he did not have a chance to make wudu, make adhan anyway, and then make wudu afterwards. But not to choose and not to be lazy that always making adhan when a person is not in state of wudu. So the adhan, it's recommended, it's mustahab for the adhan to be made when a person is in state of wudu. And then the adhan, is it mandatory for every masjid to make adhan? The adhan should be called in every masjid. But if the ruling of it that it's mustahab, it's recommended. And if in any locality there are Muslims, then the adhan should be called. If it's called once or one place, that suffice for the rest. But people, of course, they should make adhan, and it's recommended at all times. When people are at home and they did not go to the masjid, if they are living in a place where there's adhan is being called in that city, then there's no adhan for them. They can make iqama before the salah. But for the adhan, is to be called only at home if there's no adhan called in the locality that they're in. So this is with regards to those who are away from the masjid. If people are traveling and so on, the Prophet ﷺ, when they're traveling, they would make adhan and then iqama, because when they're on the way, there's no adhan is being called. As for those who are listening to the adhan, and this is another virtue, to listen to the adhan. And that's one of the things that we should try our best to be among those who hears the adhan, and to stop talking when the adhan is being called, and to focus on what is being said, and to repeat after the mu'adhin, as the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, and he gets the same reward as the mu'adhin, and more rewards to be given when a person says things. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man qala hina yasma'u al-mu'adhin ashhadu an la ilaha illallah." That's afterwards, right? But to say after, to say with the mu'adhin after everything that the mu'adhin says, to say with him, right? So if the mu'adhin says Allahu Akbar, you say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So this is not just some melody that is being said for the beginning of the salah, but this is something also that a Muslim interact with. So we stop talking, we listen to the adhan, we say after the mu'adhin, whatever he says, we say after him. And also when he says as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm, is to say as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. And then after the mu'adhin is finished, and some said for the salatu khayrun min al-nawm sadaqta wa bararta, but what is authentic is to say as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. And after the mu'adhin is done saying, And except in Hayya ala salah, Hayya al falah, you say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And you see how this is another clear proof that there is interaction, right? There's interaction between the mu'adhin and the one listening to the adhan. So you're not just listening to words that you don't understand what is being said. Because Hayya ala salah, come to the salah. It doesn't make sense to say come to the salah when you're saying it to yourself, but rather to say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. How we learn to say that? From the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, there's no might, there's no power except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as if you are saying, since the mu'adhin is saying come to the salah, you're acknowledging that it's not going to be from your own effort, it's by the help of Allah. So you're seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to establish or to be upon what's most important in your life, which is the salah. And then Allahu Akbar, you say after the mu'adhin, as then after saying La ilaha illallah, then you say, as the Prophet ﷺ said, Man qala hina yasma' al-mu'adhin, whoever says after he hears the mu'adhin saying the adhan, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika lah, wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, raditu billahi rabba wa bi Muhammadin rasula wa bil islami dina, ghufira lahu dhanbuh. Whoever says this, his previous sins will be forgiven. And this hadith in Sahih Muslim. So to say what? To say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Again, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Then you say رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا, رضيت بالله ربا, I'm sorry, وبمحمد رسولا وبالإسلام دينا, like this. رضيت بالله ربا وبمحمد رسولا وبالإسلام دينا. Whoever says this, his previous sins will be forgiven. And then to make salah on the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. What you would say, the second part of the tashahhud. And then after that to say اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آتي محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وبعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. Whoever says this last one also, the Prophet ﷺ said, حلت له شفاعتي يوم القيامة. My shafa'a will be for him in the day of Al-Qiyamah. The intercession of the Prophet ﷺ will be given to that person. And the reward of saying salah on the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said, إذا سمعتم المؤذن, if you heard the mu'adhin, فقولوا مثل ما يقول, say exactly what he says. ثم صلوا عليه, then make salah on me, say اللهم صل على محمد and so on. فإنه من صلى علي صلاة, because indeed those who make salah for me one time, صلى الله عليه بها عشرة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make salah on him 10 times. And the salah from Allah to the creation of Allah is praising. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will praise you in the best gathering, and that's definitely a sign which thawab, rewards, and that Allah is pleased with you and so on. Then after that the Prophet ﷺ said ثم سلوا الله لي الوسيلة, then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for me الوسيلة. What's الوسيلة? فإنها منزلة في الجنة. It's a level in Jannah لا تنبغي إلا لعبد من عباد الله. It does not befit any of the slaves of Allah except to only one. وأرجو أن أكون أنا هو, and I hope that I'm the one. And the Prophet ﷺ is the one. He will be in a level in Jannah that is not for anyone else. So he said, فَمَنْ سَأَلَ لِيَ الْوَسِيلَةَ حَلَّتْ لَهُ الشَّفَاعَةِ. Whoever asks for me al-wasila, the shafa'a or the intercession also will be for him. So this is great blessings. So the order of it to be said is once the adhan is finished, that the person would say, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رضيت بالله ربا وبمحمد رسولا وبالإسلام دينا. Then to say اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد till the end. And then اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة also till the end. And we need to talk a little bit more about the meanings of it. And there's no need for us to rush, because this is something that is to be done 5 times a day. And we should try to get as much as we can from this great reward and some of the other rulings. But because of the time, we'll stop here. So next time, inshallah ta'ala, we'll talk about the meanings of what is to be said after the adhan is being called, and to continue some of these rulings of the adhan, inshallah ta'ala. And if you have any questions in a couple of minutes, we can try to do that. Listen one more time. Now, the way that is done in the haram, it's not the perfect way, right? The perfect way is to make it not too stretchy and not too melody, but it's, alhamdulillah, it's adhan, and it's to be repeated afterwards and so on. Now, the dua, again, one more time, is to say, right after the adhan, to say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله رضيت بالله ربا وبمحمد رسولا وبالإسلام دينا. And then to say اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد till the end. And then you say اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وبعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. And if you don't have it in any of the books of Adhkar, like the Fortress of the Muslim and so on, we can send it, inshallah ta'ala. And since someone asked for to have the adhan again, inshallah, if you can listen to it from the recording. I'm trying to get it again, and it's trying to get the adhan again, but if we can listen to it one more time.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Okay, inshallah, because of the time, we'll stop here. But quickly, do you say that what's said after the adhan, if it's a recorded adhan or in the clock and so on? No, you don't. Only the adhan that is being called live and at the time of the adhan, not a recorded one. But if you want to make dhikr, it's a different situation, inshallah. Can you say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah? Of course you can, but the hadith in Sahih Muslim says it like this. That you say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. But again, we'll continue. There are more things to be said in the adhan, inshallah, so we'll do that, inshallah, next time. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.